All right, so again, welcome. Today's topic is COVID fatigue. We're going to learn how to recognize it and how to manage it. So what is it? Well, it is very much like it sounds. Some people are really tired of being cooped up. Some people are still feeling really scared or fearful about going out into public. And when we start to have these feelings of sort of frustration, what happens is it can lead to carelessness in behavior. So that might show up as somebody stopping to wear a mask where previously they would have. Somebody might choose to continue with activities that they did before COVID simply because they missed them and they just can't take it anymore, or potentially ignoring other safety guidelines, maybe not as thoroughly washing their hands or having get-togethers where people aren't socially distancing. So the problem with COVID fatigue is that number one, it doesn't feel so good, and number two, we still have to take precautions and practice these safety guidelines because we want to get past COVID, right? And the only way we can get there is by everybody taking the precautions together. So what happens, what happens during COVID fatigue? What's happening now? Well, there's this phenomenon known as disaster stress. So it is something that appears in a community during a disaster period. So in other words, post-hurricane, right, or other type of disaster. And in the early stage, we find that people are pulling together and they're supporting one another. So if you go back to March and April, at the beginning of this period, you may recall some neighborhoods were putting inspirational or writing inspirational messages on sidewalks in chalk. Some neighborhoods were putting stuffed animals in windows as a sign of togetherness and supporting one another and bringing a smile to the kids. So we're far from the early stages. That's way in the past. And in the next stage, this feeling of togetherness wears off, right? And the stage can last a while, especially during COVID. We've been here a while. We're not really even sure how long we're going to be here. And we lose optimism because it's no longer this new disaster. It's just been kind of sticking around. And this can really foster negative or angry reactions from some, for all of us. And we're thinking, how long is this going to go on? What are they doing to fix this? When is the vaccine coming out? And as I mentioned earlier, this can result in risky behavior because people at this point may feel like they would rather risk getting sick than continuing to practice safety guidelines any longer. And oftentimes they may stop listening to the science that's out there. And that actually, is really an important part to helping us mitigate this. So one thing I want to mention as we go through this is that you're going to hear me use different pronouns. So I could say I, or I could say you, or the royal you, right? Or they. And that's because I want you to think about the framework of this conversation as pretty universal. So think about the information you're learning for yourself and how that can help you. Think about the information as a way to help your family or neighbors kind of help cope with the COVID fatigue, and then also your coworkers. All right, so moving on, we talked about disaster stress, and let's not forget, right, we are still experiencing all of the other stress that we experienced during, prior to COVID. These are things like developmental transitions, and major life events, which are pretty close together. So somebody who's dealing with a very big change in their life, for example, going through a divorce, or a college student that was supposed to have started college and now it looks really different, right? Or somebody who's recently had a baby during COVID or is pregnant during COVID and they're very concerned about being in a hospital. Or chronic stress like financial stress, and people have lost their jobs, unfortunately, dealing with illnesses or high risk health conditions. These are things that are regular life stressors, but as we take a look at it within the scope of disaster stress and piling everything on top of it, this just tends to maximize everything. So one thing that we want to start off with COVID fatigue is acknowledging that we have differences, and it's human nature for us to understand reality within our own terms, within our own reality, right? And thinking about being aware that others might actually have a completely different reality from us. So for example, somebody who's single versus somebody who has a larger family, and his children, their experiences are very different. So personally, I have a family, I have small children that have been at home all summer, they're bored, they can't see friends. So there's one challenge, and quite frankly, that's sometimes a little too much together time, and then they're starting school, right? But for somebody who's single or doesn't have a lot of a social connection that they can engage in now, their reality and their troubles and their challenges and their frustration is going to look really different from mine. So not all strategies to help cope are going to really be relevant or fit everybody. There might be that, as I said, too much together time or isolation or loneliness, and then there are other variables that somebody might be experiencing that we have no idea about. So we're all very different in the ways that we respond to stress. So let's take a couple of examples here. Here's Olivia. She doesn't actually work for the county, but she's 36 and she's a customer service representative. So because of the nature of her job, she can't work remotely, right? She has to come in, she has a public-facing job. So Olivia actually has her elderly parents live at home. Her mom has cancer. She spends a lot of time running errands and taking her to the doctor, and is concerned about risk exposure, right? Because she's coming to work and her mom is very high risk. On top of that, Olivia has a 12-year-old son. He's about to start school and he's going to be e-learning, and so he'll be at home as well. Olivia is a really positive person. She's pleasant. Coworkers always see her as being extremely upbeat, and manages to put those people that are around her at ease. So is Olivia okay? Well, Olivia might be okay, but we're not really sure, right? Especially if we don't know about Olivia's situation. She may be exhibiting her normal behavior, but we're not really sure if she's truly okay or if she's at a point where she's really struggling. Bob here is on the other side of that spectrum. He's 59 and he does work in an office environment, so that allows him to work remotely. He's widowed and he lives in an active adult community, which has prohibited people from visiting as a COVID safety precaution. He's also diabetic and is considered high risk, so he's got to be careful. So he is not really leaving his house all that much, if ever. And so Bob, who's really a laid back guy, likes his job, has always been really engaged. His coworkers now through virtual meetings are noticing that he's been withdrawn, he's been quiet, and he's not, being very interested in his job. Is Bob okay? Well, he's not exhibiting normal behavior, so it is highly possible that Bob is just not doing all that great. So as we're experiencing this heightened level of stress, first, I think it's important to acknowledge that it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to acknowledge that we're not feeling quite right. It's okay to acknowledge that our people in our lives that we come in contact with are not feeling quite right either. So the important thing to think about is, what is the baseline? What is somebody's kind of norm, right? That might be, and that's something to watch out for. We might be feeling off, like you just can't quite put your finger on it, but you don't feel quite right. For somebody who's easygoing, they might be easily angered or really moody. For some, it's really just not caring anymore about anything and becoming really apathetic. Some who are normally outgoing might isolate from others. You might feel burnout or exhausted or overly emotional. Sometimes the symptoms manifest themselves in other ways. So having nightmares or headaches or stomach aches, or somebody who's easily startled. So it shows up differently for different people. One way, let's talk about a few ways to manage the overwhelm. You may not be surprised that the number one thing on this list is exercise. And by far, this is one of the best ways to manage stress for a couple of reasons. Number one, exercise releases endorphins, right? It gives us our feel-good hormones, and our adrenaline, which is our not so feel-good hormone, which is released during times of stress, is kind of excreted from the body. And so getting out and moving really helps. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that when I talk about exercise, this can be a little bit of a scary word for some folks, especially if you don't exercise already. What I'm really talking about is just moving, right? So it doesn't have to be a high intensity regime or program. It doesn't have to be for a half hour or an hour. This could be simply as taking a walk down the street outside and getting a little bit of sunshine and a little bit of fresh air. It could mean walking in the park amidst nature. Being out in nature is actually shown to help manage our stress and calm ourselves down. So it's really, I would say it's under the guise of exercise, but we're going to say, let's just get outdoors and move. Talking, if you need to talk it out, if you feel that helps, is really important, and maybe even if you're not super comfortable with it, because getting those feelings out can help prevent from bottling up on those emotions and then making the situation even worse the longer it goes on. So expressing frustrations and fears is a great way to manage the stress, but just be careful that you're not getting continually caught up in all the negatives. So we're talking about sharing emotions and then potentially kind of thinking through how we might help ourselves feel better or help somebody else feel better. We're not talking about constantly rehashing over and over all the negative stuff, because that's just going to ramp up the anxiety. We're the talking and then our thoughts are also important. We want to make sure that those are constructive. So we know we can't change the situation, right? There's so much out of our control right now. It can be really daunting, but we can control how we manage that situation and how we act during that situation. So adjusting our frame of mind is excruciating, or helping somebody else reframe how they're looking at the situation. One of the best ways to do that is to practice gratitude. It's easy because there's an adage saying, your body and your heart go in the direction where you direct your thoughts. So it's easy to get stuck on all the really negative stuff, but practicing gratitude and writing that all down for things that are really good in our lives will focus our energy in our direction in a positive way. So there are plenty of things that we can still be grateful for. You don't need to make this fancy or complicated. There are no instructions or a right and a wrong way. You could simply write it down on a Post-it, or if you like your phone, you can type it into your phone. You don't have to buy a fancy book. There are no rules. The rule is you make your own rules. It's also really important to be in the moment. Think about when we start to worry, right? Usually when we're worrying, we're not in the moment. We're thinking about what's happening, what might happen in the future, which we actually don't know is going to happen in the future. Or we could be thinking of and ruminating about what's happened in the past, and we're really not focusing on being in the moment. So being in the moment can be really different for different people. Sometimes, you've probably heard of mindfulness and breathing exercises. If you're not feeling that, it could be that focusing on your surroundings and blocking everything else out is a great way to ground yourself. If you're an audiophile and you like music, it could be listening to music and really immersing yourself and being in that moment. Or when you're out for a walk, really listening to any and all sounds around you. So this is really meant to block out all the noise. And then taking life day by day, this is kind of, really pulling together the fact that we want to focus on being in the moment, because it's not helpful to wonder about the future. It just exacerbates everything. All right, so one way that we can also, I'm a little mouse happy. One way we can help others in this time of COVID fatigue is to use the buddy system. And this probably pertains more to either a work scenario or perhaps a neighbor that you might not have known so well. One way to do that is to get to know each other, and we're not talking deep secrets or deep friendship, but really kind of like, hey, their family situation, what they do, their hobbies. You know, in the case of Olivia, perhaps her coworkers know or not know that she's dealing with having a 12-year-old son at home and a mom with cancer and all of these other stresses. She's pretty upbeat, right? So we're thinking, hey, Olivia's good. But just getting to know somebody's situation can be really helpful for us to understand, or even ask, hey, do you need any help? How are you doing? Checking in with those folks. And then allowing them to get things out, right? So listening carefully, sharing experiences, and saying just, hey, this is a tough situation. It's completely acceptable and not, you know, and not surprising that you're not feeling so great, that you're having a hard time. So giving yourself and others permission to say, hey, it's okay not to be okay. Again, recognizing achievements, that's sort of focusing on the positive, encouraging others to take breaks. If you are in a manager or supervisory position on this call, consider that for your employees. They might just need a little extra time to take a breath and feel like that they actually have permission from their supervisor managers to do that. And then also sharing opportunities for stress relief. So we do have a lot of information on best resources and resources for families through the wellness program. They're on our COVID-19 page under HR. And then we also help promote them in our blog. We help include them in our Cheer Health newsletter. So please keep your eye out for these communications that are coming through. They'll give you some great ideas and tips and resources to do that. One big sticking point is media and managing it. So media can be really good. My friends and I joke that sometimes what keeps us going is the humor and the funny memes that are out there that are COVID related, whether they are pertaining to kids and homeschooling or some other aspect of COVID. And that's just, you know, what are you going to do? Laughter is the best medicine, right? But it can go the other way because too much news is overwhelming. If you're finding that you're constantly glued to the TV and watching this doom and gloom and the uncertainty, it's just going to make anxiety much worse. So limit news to trusted, responsible sources. You want to make sure that you're getting the latest on science, but then turn it off. Put the phone down, put your iPad down, turn the TV off. Avoiding doom scrolling, that's the same kind of idea. If you're reading that news, it's all doom and gloom. And it's important to really check out and separate yourself from that a little bit. Sometimes people get caught up trading posts with people that we might disagree with. So not everybody feels the same way about COVID. Not everybody believes what you believe about wearing a mask or social distancing. And it's really not helpful and not productive at all to kind of engage in those arguments, because that's just going to ratchet up anger as well. So let's say you're doing well. You've checked in with yourself. You feel like you're managing everything well, or you have at least the tools, right, to help manage some of that well. But you're noticing that others are struggling with COVID fatigue, and they may not be doing the safest things. You may find that they're careless about safety because they're just angry about it, or careless because they don't care anymore. Some of this is connected to age and developmental stages of our own mortality. So for example, the younger somebody is, the further away they seem or they are from their own mortality, and they might seem like or feel like they're invincible, this is never going to happen to me, and so they're going to discard these safety measures as unnecessary. So one thing, you could think of a few strategies here, rather, to encourage somebody to re-engage in these safety practices. Now, these are ideas because, again, everybody's different, and so they're going to resonate differently with somebody. Perhaps framing it in a way that a person think about the safety of their family might kind of inspire them to put that mask back on or stop having barbecues with all their neighbors. Or from a rational perspective, somebody could respond to the fact that, hey, listen, in order for our COVID cases to decline, if you want to get back to your regular activities that you love, put that mask back on, start being careful again. One way to, I guess, promote a positive behavior is to model wearing a mask yourself. Humans are kind of sheep, right? We tend to kind of follow what others are doing. You may have even witnessed this yourself. If you're wearing a mask and you walk into a room and somebody or the groups are not wearing a mask, we're much more likely to take that mask off because it's what others are doing. And this flips it as well. So sometimes this is like a be strong, wear that mask regardless of what others are doing around you. Sometimes positive reinforcement, just thanking people for wearing a mask, can really go a long way and inspire them to continue to wear their mask. And then also be mindful that some people, they're just going to remain resistant, and there's nothing that you can do to change their mind, and to acknowledge this is out of your control, and to go back to that focus of thinking about the ways in which we can control our own situation. Okay, and so finally, here's kind of my challenge for you. Number one, take care of yourself, right? You want to make sure, check in, be open and pretty honest with yourself about how you're feeling, and know that it is okay not to be okay. As far as even for yourself or for others, look at any inconsistency in behaviors, whether it's somebody who was pretty outgoing and now is becoming a little bit more introverted, or somebody who is experiencing physical kind of manifestations of the stress, like headaches or stomach aches or nightmares, right? These are changes that could mean that they are really stressed and not managing quite so well, or maybe need some support. Provide wellness resources. So the information and the resources that we offer to you, our employees, they are meant to be shared. Don't keep them a secret. They are on our website, which is available to the public. So if you have the links, feel free to share them, right, with anybody. We want everybody to feel better. Be compassionate to yourself and others. This is a really strange time, and it is no surprise that we might be more likely to be short with somebody or have to handle more. If you're experiencing this type of behavior from others, just be compassionate. And then we're often our own self-critics, so be compassionate to yourself as well. And then reach out for help. This can be really hard because it's really kind of admitting that you're not doing so hot. So this is harder than one might think sometimes, but there are definitely resources for that. We have all of our EAP information on the website as well. They are great with COVID support. They can help kind of talk somebody through the anxiety and stress and provide continual support if needed. Let's see, what else? All right, so that is it for my presentation, and I am looking at, let me check the questions. Okay, I think we're good on the questions. All right, we have a comment from David. Unfortunately, regarding modeling wearing a mask, the president waited until it was way too late. Yeah, so it's, I want to be careful here because I don't want to get too much into politics, but yes, this goes into being very, very confused about the information that's coming out. Earlier, as we were experiencing this, the news was saying it doesn't help, there's no point in wearing face coverings, and then that recommendation changed, so now we should be wearing face coverings, and they do in fact help. So, one thing to consider is this pandemic is something that researchers are working very hard to understand, and it can take some time, and they're learning more and more. Sometimes the communication changes, as we've seen. It is really hard to go back to saying, hey, put your mask on now, that really helps, when we've heard before that it doesn't. Let's see. UHC saw fit to increase mental visits from $10 to $25. That is also something that I really am not in a place to comment on as to why the benefit plan changed. It did shift from an outside company, ComPsych, that we combine the mental health benefits with UHC. So I don't know why that decision was made. I do know that the EAP visits, the first 6 visits per subject or per topic that you need assistance for, or anybody that's living in your household, quite frankly, is free. So let's say you're trying to manage COVID stress, or a specific aspect of that, you would have 6 free visits within that. And then let's say at a different time, you are seeking assistance for parenting or going through a divorce. So in each of these instances, you would be granted 6 free sessions. All right, anything else that anybody wants to comment on or share or ask me? All right, well, I thank you all for joining us. If you think of something or are looking for specific resources and can't find them, feel free to email me directly. The easiest way to do that is either wellness@pinellascounty.org or jgrannis@pinellascounty.org, and I'm more than happy to help. Thanks so much and have a great day.